Okay, this is my open letter to Soka University of America and to the Soka Gakkai International, SGI-USA, dated, this is the second draft. I haven't yet typed it on the computer, so this is a written form. Dear SGI-USA leaders and members, and Soka University of America students, faculty, and staff, I have wanted to write this letter for a while, but now, due to events that happened at my alma mater, I feel I can wait no longer in addressing this issue. In Daisaku Ikeda's dialogue with Joseph Derbeloff, he says all religions have a rule against lying, but Buddhism alone requires its members. Sorry, I turned off the thing. But Buddhism alone requires its members to speak the truth. I hope the truths I speak in this letter don't grate too hard on the ears. I have been a very strong member of the SGI-USA since about 1980, when I graduated from the Junior Pioneers, which was the former name of the Future Division, and joined the brass band. I have read more books by President Ikeda than any other author, though I am an extremely avid reader of many other subjects. One thing I have been extremely fond of in President Ikeda's writings and dialogues is his consistency in pointing out the extreme dangers of authoritarianism and of blindly following those who claim to be authorities. In 2020, when the SGI-USA and SUA decided to go along with unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. and Davos in their totalitarian and unconstitutional mandates to stop people from, quote, peacefully assembling, end quote, which is our U.S. constitutional First Amendment right, I was extremely disheartened that despite President Ikeda's lifelong promotion of dialogue, the SGI-USA had no dialogue with district leaders before making the unconscionable decision and unconstitutional decision to shutter all community centers and ban all members from peacefully assembling at district meetings and other Buddhist activities. Like with SUA, likewise, SUA, Soka University of America, had no dialogue with its alumni. At the time, I was a district men's division leader in San Diego, and we had very dynamic discussion meetings in my apartment in Normal Heights. Along with monthly district discussion meetings at my place, we also had Daimoku Tozos every other week as well. That's where we chanted 1 hour. That's what a Daimoku Tozo is. Living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, I looked forward so much to those 3 times a month where I'd have a reason to clean my apartment, and up to sometimes 30 people would show up in my living room to have Buddhist meetings. The mystical thing about my apartment at the time was when I was first getting a tour of it before moving in, the lady from the property management group asked me about my necklace. It wasn't really a necklace. It was my juzu beads. At the time, I would wear them around my neck. It reminded me to do shakabuku, which is introducing people to Buddhism. Every time someone saw it, they would invariably say, quote, "Wow, nice necklace," end quote. To which I would tell them they are my juzu beads that I use to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. When I told this lady giving me the tour of my apartment, which was apartment 7, like the 7 characters of the Daimoku, Namu-myoho Renge-kyo, she said the previous tenant used to have Buddhist gatherings in this apartment. So when I moved into this apartment that used to have North Park District meetings, it soon became the home again of North Park District. During my teenage years, after reading 3 dialogues by Daisaku Ikeda, the first one, Man Himself Must Choose, with Arnold Toynbee, which is now titled Choose Life, and Dawn After Dark, a dialogue with Rene Hughe. I can't pronounce his name. It's Huyghe. I don't know how to pronounce that name. And founder of the Club of Rome, Before It's Too Late, with Aurelio Pesci. I realized at about 17 years of age that everything on the mainstream so-called quote-unquote news was in fact disinformation and or misinformation. I learned to turn off the TV in my senior year of high school and start reading books ravenously, seeking the truths to world issues. Therefore, when the so-called quote-unquote pandemic hit, which I knew was no different than a seasonal flu, which have all been coronaviruses ever since the 1980s, which have all been laboratory creations perpetuated by people ignorantly taking flu shots, I've never in my life allowed a flu to stop me from living my life. Therefore, I was so shocked that the SGI USA was using the nonsense fear porn that the brought to you by Pfizer mainstream media, was falsely pushing to shut down the whole Kozenrufu movement. And SUA went along with it to shut down the whole campus. How many worse disease outbreaks were there in the Daishonen's time? And never once did he use the fear of catching a disease to stop people from practicing in the Sangha, which is the community of believers. And worse, the SGI USA did this without even conducting a dialogue with its frontline leaders. The district leaders, who I was told for over 40 years plus, were the most important leaders of the organization. Instead, some pencil pushers in LA or elsewhere just decided on their own to shut down all the meetings without even consulting us district leaders to see what we thought. So during this 2+ years of not having SGI meetings in my apartment, I instead decided to start hosting a podcast in my living room. Within weeks of the unconstitutional shutdown, I started having groups of people that I met when I was out in the community doing Kozenrufu with the standalone spirit which Sensei taught me all my life. Luckily, every day I defied the unconstitutional house arrest mandates. I found hundreds of artists and singer-songwriters and painters and rap artists and activists out all over the streets of San Diego that could see through the lies of the brought to you by Pfizer corporate quote-unquote news propaganda. About 2 times a month throughout the whole pandemic, I would film these podcasts live on Facebook and Instagram and later upload them to YouTube. The podcast was called Live from Normal Heights, and all 30+ episodes can still be found on YouTube. Every day of the pandemic, while I was delivering groceries for Amazon Fresh Groceries and Whole Foods, I would meet people on the streets of San Diego who, like me, were not following any of the counterproductive, unscientific, extremely destructive of human health and happiness, and unconstitutional mandates against quote-unquote peaceful assembly, which is our First Amendment right. As the current HHS Secretary, Human Health Services Secretary of the U.S. says, quote, "The writers of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights have no exemption for pandemics or epidemics, because they had far worse illnesses in their time than the overhyped COVID scare. I reached out to all the youth in San Diego who were immune to all the disinformation and misinformation of the brought to you by Pfizer corporate media shills, who claimed to be bringing you the quote unquote news, which was nothing but fear porn to push policies of human control, which had absolutely nothing to do with public health. I would often write on my Facebook page during this whole human fabricated fiasco, which I rightly called both a scamdemic and a plandemic, quote, faith is to fear nothing, to stand unswayed, the power to surmount any obstacle. Faith is the source of all solutions, the mighty ship needed to cross the sea of sufferings, which is President Ikeda's guidance to the youth of America that he wrote in his 1970s poem, To My Young American Friends. Nowhere in that poem did he say, fear nothing except a laboratory-created virus, and stay in your houses. Stop doing Kozen Rufu until the talking heads on TV tell you it's safe to go back outside. In all of the 30-plus podcasts that I conducted in the former district home of SGI USA North Park District, I usually had from 3 to 20 people gather, just like I did for my SGI meetings before SGI USA forbid it. None of us wore masks except one person who worked for the government who was afraid she would get in trouble. None of us social distanced. None of the over 100 people that took part in my podcast got sick by coming to my apartment, and many of them learned about my Buddhist practice as my very big Butsudan was right next to where we were filming the podcast. And everyone who came always asked about my Butsudan. I was able to introduce many more people to this practice than all the members who were blindly following the unconstitutional mandates and instead only gathered on Zoom. As President Ikeda wrote, quote, quite simply, there can be no true democracy unless the citizens of a country realize that they are sovereign, that they are the main protagonists, and then with wisdom and a strong sense of responsibility, take action based on that realization. Democracy cannot be successful if in its mission unless the people rouse themselves to become more informed and involved, unless they unite, unless they establish an unshakable force for justice and keep a strict eye on the activities of the powerful, end quote. This is from his April 13th guidance in the For Today and Tomorrow Daily Encouragements. So who were the powerful that he's speaking of in this guidance during the COVID coup? The high priest of scientism, Anthony Fauci, as detailed in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s best-selling book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health, has had a long, deadly career of abuse of science and medicine to line him and his minions' pockets at the expense of hundreds of thousands of humans and animals' lives. Just during the laboratory-created AIDS crisis alone, Mr. Fauci killed more people than any other doctor in history, including Shido Ishii and Joseph Mengele. Bill Gates, who many aware people rightly call Kill Gates, for the incredible increase in deaths rates everywhere he goes, promoting his poisons, falsely called vaccines. In one Danish study of his vaccine promotion schemes in Africa, it shows that he killed 4 people for every 1 person he supposedly saved. Is there no wonder that he stated Is it no wonder that he started the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute for Population and Reproductive Health? So, what does he want to do to the population? He has said publicly that with his vaccine programs, he hopes to reduce the population of the world by 10 to 15%. In the Danish study on Africa, a Bill in the Danish study on Africa's Bill Gates sorry, in the Danish study on Africa, Bill Gates was using a vaccine that was pulled from the market in most industrial countries because it was shown to be so unsafe and deadly. But for incredible profits, Bill Gates pushed this deadly product on so many African countries and fraudulently called his deadly work philanthropy. There is nothing philanthropic that Bill Gates, a known eugenicist, has done anywhere around the world. How could anyone, especially an SGI USA leader or a person responsible for SUA policy, be so blind to these criminals and their misanthropic agenda? There was absolutely nothing the US government nor its so-called health agencies did during the scamdemic that had anything to do with public health or human safety. Everything they did caused more deaths and more suffering, and the destruction of people's lives and the stealing of their property. How could the SGI USA leaders and the administrators at SUA be so blind to this? It was so blatantly obvious to anyone who was not watching the brought to you by Pfizer media circus. During the first COVID-1 outbreak in the early turn of the millennium, which they called SARS-1, I was still studying at Soka University of America, but I knew from the writings and lectures of best-selling author and government whistleblower Dr. Leonard Horowitz that it was a laboratory bioweapon, both the disease and the more deadly medical countermeasure, falsely called a medicine, which was AZT. In his best-selling book, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, Nature, Accident, or Intentional, Dr. Horowitz shows how the HIV virus, supposedly responsible for AIDS, was created by Dr. Robert Gallo in a Bethesda, Maryland laboratory under contracts with Lytton Bionetics. The same doctor who created it was falsely credited for discovering HIV. Dr. Horowitz also showed that Africans, African Americans, and gay people were all directly targeted with this bioweapon called HIV/AIDS, and even worse, AZT, which was just as deadly as remdesivir during the COVID coup. To me, the greatest crime members of the SGI USA and people associated with my alma mater, SUA, should be concerned about relating to this whole pandemic was not only did SGI USA go along with the fascist and undemocratic shuttering of all SGI activities and in-person classes at SUA, but once the US government falsely licensed and shoddily tested the bioweapon falsely called a vaccine and unleashed it on the public, this experimental and very dangerous medical procedure was pushed on all the members of SGI USA and even their children, who weren't at all a risk to catching COVID or dying from COVID. And SUA required all faculty, staff, and students to allow this product to be injected into their bodies, even to people like me who had natural immunity. Like any conscious or aware person, I went out and actively tried to contract COVID during the COVID coup because I knew, like with measles and the chicken pox, once I got natural immunity, I would be protected for life. I saw through all the lies in the brought to you by the Pfizer media about people dying in hospitals. The truth was, people were being murdered in hospitals due to Dr. Fauci's pushing people to be given a known deadly chemotherapy drug called remdesivir. Nurses and doctors started calling this deadly drug "Run, death is near." On top of this, anyone who went into a hospital during the COVID coup was tested until they got a false positive test. With a PCR test that is known to give more false positives than otherwise. So they could claim they died of COVID, no matter what the real cause of their death. So they could be, sorry, I'm reading my own writing, it's hard to read. Oh, so they can show 5 times the number of deaths than what they would have if they would have listed the real cause of deaths, which sometimes was heart attacks, sometimes was car accidents, sometimes was gunshot wounds, and other times was cancer. Or most often was the deadly protocol of administering the deadly remdesivir. Since I studied diseases for many years before the COVID coup, I knew that all viruses over time will become will mutate to become less deadly. So I went out and caught it during the so-called deadliest strain, the Delta wave. So I could make the virus mutate to a less deadly strain. Thanks to me and other courageous people who refused to stay on unconstitutional house arrest, we beat the laboratory created virus. So for us who put an end to the COVID coup, the thought that we would now take an experimental medical procedure after we already survived the worst wave of the flu and therefore had natural immunity to it was just absolute insanity. But the SGI USA leaders who were pushing this experimental medical procedure on all members had and their children and whomever at SUA who was doing likewise didn't seem to know that they were not only illegally practicing medicine without a license, but were violating the Nuremberg Convention Charter against medical experimentation on people without informed consent. To someone like me who graduated with honors from SUA's first graduating class, I was equally appalled that the campus of my alma mater was used to medically experiment on over 300,000 people during the COVID coup. Therefore, I tried to talk to one of the lawyers of SUA, one of my favorite YMD leaders from the 80s and 90s when I was a YMD district leader, then YMD chapter leader, then area YMD leader, and then vice regional YMD leader before attending Soka University, Mr. Dave Welch. I told him that the medical experimentations that were being conducted on SUA's campus were not only illegal, but they went against the Nuremberg Charter. But shockingly, he didn't want to listen to my concerns. The only comment he had was he really didn't care much for Trump, as if his Trump derangement syndrome had anything to do with the crimes being perpetuated at SUA that he was supposed to be giving sound legal advice to. For those that are not aware of the Nuremberg Charter and the laws in the United States prohibiting medical experimentation without informed consent, let me detail it to you the way I tried to detail it to Dave Welch, the SUA lawyer, who didn't at all seem to be concerned that both SGI USA and SUA were violating international humanitarian conventions at a school that the founder, Daisaku Ikeda, originally wanted to call the University for Human Rights. He would be rolling in his grave now if he wasn't cremated. There are two aspects to informed consent. First, you have to inform the test subjects, those 300,000 people who were injected on SUA's campus, of all the known risks of the medical experiment and all the known benefits. So what were the known benefits to the COVID jab? As the president of international developed markets at Pfizer testified before Parliament of the EU, European Union on October 10th, 2022, she admits Pfizer never tested whether their so-called vaccine would stop the spread of COVID because, as she's ignorantly said, we were working at the speed of science. Yet, the American people were lied to by High Priest of Scientism, Dr. Fauci, that the jab was 100% effective at stopping the spread before it was rolled out to the public. This blatant lie was repeated by Rachel Mockingbird Maddow and President Biden on the Brought to You by Pfizer corporate media. And what were the known side effects or risks to taking part in this medical experimentation? If anyone bothered to read the Pfizer trial documents that were published to the FDA, that were submitted to the FDA, which gave it an experimental emergency use authorization, which the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, tried to conceal from the U.S. public for 75 years, in order to save one person's life, you had to kill 4 people. So in order to save one life, you had to kill 4 people, just like the vaccines, and injure hundreds of others, just like the so-called vaccines Bill Gates was pushing on Africa. So this is the first volume of the Pfizer document papers. The second part of informed consent is you can't experiment on anyone medically if they have been subjected to either A, undue influence, and B, undue coercion. Undue influence is when the SGI USA said, if you want to finally be able to come back to your community center or FNCC, which you have been denied access to for over 2 years, even though you have, like me, been sustaining them with financial monthly contributions the whole time, you have to take part in this very risky medical experiment. That's undue influence. Undue coercion is when SUA said, if you don't take the risky medical experiment, you can no longer be a student, faculty, or staff at SUA. I'm sure I'm not the only person who refused to be influenced or coerced to taking part in this dangerous, immoral, and illegal medical experiment. Sorry. But unfortunately, many people weren't as wise or informed as I was. One of them, Lucas Colombo, SUA class of 2027, who before going to SUA already had a heart condition, and it was well known that young men in their teens and 20s were most at risk for heart problems after taking part in this medical experiment. He unfortunately passed away while attending SUA on April 25th, 2025. It was his unfortunate death that prompted me to finally write this letter. Daisaku Ikeda often said and wrote that at times of crisis, the true character of people, Daisaku Ikeda often said and wrote that at times of crises, the true character of people will come to the surface and you can see who they really are. I personally had my district leadership position taken away from me for my opposition to these crimes that SUA and SGI-USA perpetuated on its membership and its students, faculty, and staff. But I can only hope that the email I sent to the SGI-USA when they asked us to upload our vaccine passports to the membership portal so we could finally be let back to the community centers. I hope this email somehow made the SGI-USA leadership come back to their senses and drop this draconian policy, which they did shortly after I wrote that letter. Luckily, at one of my jobs, I was given a religious exemption, so I wasn't forced to take the COVID jab to get this job, which would have been undue influence. The reason I was given the religious exemption was I explained to my employer the Eightfold Path in Buddhism and the 5 aggregates in Buddhism. As I explained in my letter to my employer, one of the Eightfold Path is right action, which includes volitional action. I explained that my daughter was vaccine injured due to one of the vaccines she was required to take to study in the US. Had I been more aware of the extreme risks of all vaccines before she was injured, I wouldn't have let her take them. But this was before the COVID coup, and my ignorance at the time caused her a lot of pain and suffering. In explaining the 5 aggregates to my employer to get my medical exemption, 1 is form, 2 is sensation, 3 is perception, 4 is volition, 5 is consciousness. I explained that without volition, I can't be said to be a conscious being, let alone a bodhisattva or a Buddhist. I did volunteer to donate my body to science, but not until I die. How can you be a conscious person without volition? When I just asked the AI on my phone, what Daisaku Ikeda said about volition, it gave me a whole page of examples, one of which was, quote, Ikeda highlights volition as the link between perception and action, encompassing will, wants, and desires. And, quote, he suggests that a fundamental revolution in the life of a single individual, fueled by volition, can foster the kind of consciousness and solidarity that liberates humanity from cycles of warfare and violence, end quote. So when the SGI started unduly coercing its membership to take part in this illegal and extremely dangerous medical experiment, I started a group on Facebook called SGI Members for Bodily Autonomy. Though Facebook shadow bans everything I do now and worse during the COVID coup, I was happy a few other members felt as I did and joined the group so we could finally have the dialogue that SGI USA was refusing to have with its membership and frontline leaders. It was shortly after this that I was home visited by 3 men's division members in San Diego who came to inform me that my district was being combined with another district and that I I would no longer be the leader. In the home visit, they asked me if I could take down the Facebook group called Soka Gakkai Members for Bodily Autonomy, to which I said, if anyone is willing to have a dialogue with me and prove my points of view wrong, I will gladly take it down and issue an apology about how I misunderstood SGI USA's motives and their policy. I said that it is exactly what Nichiren said in the Rishoan Kokuran on securing the peace of the land through the practice of true Buddhism. But 2 years later, and no one has been willing to have a dialogue with me until finally Lucas's passing. Finally, the SUA Alumni Association had a dialogue with me because they were shocked by my message to them on their announcement of Lucas's passing at SUA. From my dialogue with them, I have surmised that Lucas did take a COVID vaccine, but it wasn't at the behest of SUA because he wasn't yet a student at SUA when the policy to enforce them were in effect. But my question was how much of the undue influence of SGI in his country, Brazil, prompted him to take this dangerous experimental product when he already had a heart condition. And knowing he was hoping to attend SUA at this time or in the future, and that they were mandating it, how much of that undue coercion contributed to him donating his life to mad scientists? This flu called COVID had a 99.9% survivability rate for the average person and had an even better survivability rate for young men like Lucas. He did not need to take a fake vaccine for COVID, nor did any of the students of SUA who were all mandated to do so by SUA. I think it's obvious that SGI USA and SUA were wrong for expecting people to blindly take an experimental product that now has turned out to be very deadly, and according to Pfizer's own studies, has a 400% negative efficacy, meaning, as I said before, you have to kill 4 people in order to save one person's life with this so-called vaccine. After this home visit, which stripped me of my district leadership responsibility, I decided to start another Facebook group called Soka University Alumni and Students for Bodily Autonomy, which has been even more suppressed and shadow banned than the first group I mentioned. As a first-year honors graduate of SUA class of 2005, I am very appalled by SUA's illegal and unethical COVID policy, and I hold the I hold SGI Brazil and SUA partially responsible for the murder of Lucas. When SGI USA started to have in-person meetings again, I was shocked to be informed by my previous co-district leader that 8 people in my SGI USA chapter in San Diego had contracted cancer. In all my 50 plus years of being in the SGI USA and my 13 years practicing in the Tokyo International Group as a member in Japan, never have I ever been in a chapter that had more than one person who had cancer at one given time. I'm not sure if all these 8 people who had contracted cancer took the experimental medical procedure that was unjustifiably pushed on them by the organization, but I wouldn't doubt it. So what can we do now to rectify this tragic situation? When are we going to have an open dialogue about this atrocity? If you have the guts to read the 2-volume book, The Pfizer Papers, this is the first one, Pfizer's Crimes Against Humanity, edited by Rhodes Scholar and best-selling author Naomi Wolf, along with Amy Kelly, where they had medical doctors, scientists, and medical trial analysts sift through and study the thousands of pages of Pfizer trial documents that the FDA used to approve this deadly product, which they fought in court and lost the battle to keep from the public for 75 years. You will see that not only did Pfizer and the FDA know that this product would greatly increase heart conditions, cancer risks to everyone who took it, but they knew it would drastically decrease a woman's ability to get pregnant and to give birth to a healthy child and or have a healthy pregnancy. And we have seen the deadly effect of this product worldwide since it was first unleashed on the public or on the world. Across the board, sudden deaths have gone up, birth rates have gone down, and turbo cancers are affecting young and old alike. So many of the youth of SGI come from the members having kids. Many of them are now students at SUA or were students there over the last 20 years. Are we going to see the membership of the SGI decline drastically along with the plummeting birth rates around the world? When are we going to have any accountability? Who in the SGI USA were responsible for this deadly action of illegally practicing medicine without a license? Did any of them know that it was illegal to recommend medical procedures if you don't have a medical license? When I first heard in 2021 that SGI USA was requiring this experimental jab, I wrote on my Facebook page that this was far worse than when the Nichiren Shoshu priesthood required its memberships. Sorry, I should have got a drink of water. This was far worse than when Nichiren Shoshu priesthood required its membership to enshrine the Shinto talisman in their homes during World War II. This talisman, the COVID jab, pushed by high priest of the cult of pharmacology, Anthony Fauci, who needed a presidential pardon to save him from all of his crimes, was far more deadly and had much worse consequences than someone enshrining a benign relic of some ancient religion. Shinto was a much more benign religion than the cult of pharma as pushed by the criminal high priest Anthony Fauci. Ever since the criminal Rockefeller bastardized the healing arts with his toxic petroleum poisons falsely called medicines, the number 3 cause of deaths in the U.S. is prescription drugs. They shouldn't be called, that's another subject. The time is now for not only a dialogue about this tragic episode in our Kozarufu movement, but an education campaign to teach members how to rectify the damage that has been done to their immune systems and their bodies. The spike protein in the jab, along with the self-assembling lipid nanoparticles, and the SV40, which is simian virus 40, which was put in the Pfizer jab, which is contributing to this skyrocketing cases of cancer, can be taken out of people's bodies. Across the U.S., morticians and embalmers have reported long calamari-like clots that they have been pulling out of people's veins and their arteries in order for them to be able to inject embalming fluid into people who have died after taking the clot shot. All humans are prone to making mistakes. And if the leaders of the SGI-USA and whomever at SUA made the decision to mandate this deadly experimental product have not by now realized the tragic mistake they made during the COVID coup, and they are not willing to have a dialogue to remedy or rectify this situation, should they still be leaders of our organization? And should they still be administering Soka University of America? A true sign of a leader is someone who can see they made a mistake and then quickly take corrective actions to rectify the mistake. This is what Daisaku Ikeda has taught me about leadership all my life. There are many doctors now that are creating many natural products to try to clean the bodies of their patients of the deadly aspects of this so-called vaccine. One of the most deadly parts of especially the Pfizer bioweapon is SV40, simian virus 40, which was known to be a cancer-causing agent. In addition, the deadly synthetic spike protein that has been able to get past the blood-brain barrier and even pass through to the placenta of a pregnant woman's baby can be removed from people's bodies with chelation and other natural products. Some doctors have also been working to figure out how to cleanse the body of the deadly self-assembling lipid nanoparticles contained in the so-called vaccines and boosters. Someone in SGI USA and someone at SUA who doesn't have a conflict of interest should be put in charge of an educational program to remedy this insane tragedy. We need to now implement an educational program to educate victims of SGI USA and SUA's COVID policy, and there is no time to waste in this endeavor. There are many smart graduates of SUA and graduates of other universities who are good at research, who can help in this endeavor. But time is of the essence. If we don't want to see more untimely deaths like Lucas Colombo Ferreira at SUA and in SGI, and we don't want more skyrocketing cancer cases, if there is any way I can assist in this endeavor, I would be glad to do whatever I can to help. Please don't hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Timothy Van Kampen Janakis. P.S. A lion will not be silenced. Thank you very much.